Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Now, the migrant camp, which is known as the jungle in Calais, has been around a lot longer than most people think. It's been there since the late 1990s. But talking about today, in 2016, there are nearly 10,000 refugees there now at the moment. Women, children, men, whom are fleeing persecution, war, horrors, the sort of things we couldn't imagine. And I really mean that, we couldn't imagine. I mean, you see these things on television, you see a reporter walking through a refugee camp and you think that's bad. And we are human beings and we do have a lot of love in us and you genuinely think that's bad. But then you go and you put something in the oven or you go and take the dog for a walk. I mentioned at the beginning of the programme, this programme, in terms of myself, I've got very strong opinions about why those unfortunate people who've not done anything to anybody have been driven out of the countries they have been forced to leave. But where do you reconcile, or how do you reconcile that with helping these people? Many people in the independent media, myself included, say that the refugee crisis is an intended consequence of chaos in the Middle East. But that doesn't change the fact that thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, children, never did a thing wrong, never harmed a hair on anybody's head, are in dire, dire straits. Well, my first guest has a lot to say about that. She's a former investment banker and entrepreneur. She's a life coach now, does a lot of work with children, and is a journalist, calls herself a social entrepreneur. I had a lovely chat with her earlier on today. She's been to see the jungle camp, the Calais refugee camp, a couple of times, and in fact wrote a really interesting and touching article for Mumsnet about it, which I will tweet out shortly. Having seen the conditions faced by the people there, she believed that she had to act. And one of the things she's done is set up a Facebook page called the London Familia Refugee Support Page, which has got a lot of interest. And she's interested in helping these children, providing them with what they need, providing them with homes, with food, with shelter, with help. And I think we should welcome her to the programme. Remember, I want your opinions on this. It's at Richie Allen Show, Richie at richieallen.co.uk. Let's welcome to the show Remi Olajoyegbe. Remi, I hope I pronounced that surname right because I've been practicing it all afternoon. How are you?
Perfect, Richie.
Listen, thanks for coming on the programme. And this is serious, and I've already had a few tweets on it, and I did guess today that our listeners would say, regardless of who and why, you know, in terms of who's to blame for what's happened here, we're still dealing with people who, it certainly isn't their fault, and they're in dire need of help. Tell us about your experiences when you visited the refugee camp in Calais, because I guess seeing it on television and being there, Remi, are two different things. What did you find when you went there?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on the show. It's hard to put into words, to be honest. And I think while photos tell part of the story, they're effectively a kind of two-dimensional representation of a very three-dimensional situation. And so, you know, you can only get a certain feel for them. It's an utterly dire situation that's going on in Calais and Dunkirk, and indeed so many of these refugee camps. Can you hear me, Richie? Because I've suddenly...
Loud and clear, Remi. Yeah, you've got me. Go ahead.
Thanks. And for me, I went first with a couple of friends last November, just felt the need to go and see for myself. You know, the media coverage had been pretty derisory and continued to be so. And so we jumped in the car and contacted the charity that I now work with and try and raise awareness for, Help Refugees, and went to offer our services, you know. And, you know, to see the scale of the camp then, this is obviously pre the evictions and pre the downsizing of the camp, you know, 6,000 plus people living in an open, desolate, densely muddy wasteland, you know, no sanitation, no electricity, no infrastructure, little food. By the way, not very much has changed in all of that time. Living in bitterly freezing conditions, you know, mud-caked tents. And if you're lucky, you'd get, if you were a woman and child, you'd get, an uninsulated wooden box So to think that, you go there and the average stay is probably 5.5 months, and that's just one of the recent statistics that's come out of the recent census. The average stay is that in those conditions. I was amazed that people were coping, and I won't say living, I'll say surviving. So for me, it was an incredibly eye-opening experience. I spent most of the day fighting back the tears, and helping with the distribution. And, distribution is, you're helping people kind of, create packs of clothes for the week and giving them out to people. So it was just, a very moving experience. But I think it's important to mention, I was also really amazed at the resilience and the fortitude and the kindness of so many of the people that I met, the refugees and long-term volunteers alike, in such extreme conditions. The collaboration between these amazing long-term volunteers and the refugees in the camp was just, it blew my mind. And I just came away thinking, God, we've got a lot to learn.
You felt bad about yourself. You felt bad about, I can get that. I've heard that said by NGOs and by volunteers who have gone to places before. I mentioned to you today, a great friend of mine used to work for Concern, the Irish charity, and she said the same thing. At any time when you're handing out clothes and you're moving from tent to tent and you're trying to help people as best you can, at any time do you begin to feel overcome or overwhelmed by the enormity of helping so many people, and do you get dispirited because of that?
100%. It's absolutely overwhelming, and you can't help the number of people that need help. That's the problem. Remember that this is a volunteer-led movement, and that's one of the things I found very hard to get my head around, was the total absence of aid. Many people, Richie, still don't understand that because the French and the British governments have failed to declare this an emergency humanitarian crisis, no aid agencies can access the area. So there's no Oxfam, there's no Red Cross, there's no Save the Children. So I was completely overwhelmed and alarmed by the fact that these people were being sustained solely on the goodwill of a few people taking direct action. I couldn't believe it. I've got to know a couple of the founders of Help Refugees, Josie and Liana, over that period, and they started a charity, a few women, from a deeply compassionate place to respond to a humanitarian crisis. But to think that several thousand people, volunteers alike, are having their shelters built, warehouses maintained, food stocks, clothing stocks, funding long-term volunteers so they can work with these people. To think that that's all going on from a few people's efforts was just mind-blowing and completely overwhelming.
Now tell me this,
very
Remi.
worrying that wasn't being covered. That mainstream media was. Look, I'm not saying that there weren't good articles published, but relative to the scale of the crisis and the enormity of what was going on, I was just so alarmed and also very overwhelmed by the brutality that these people were experiencing. They were suffering in those camps. The Refugee Rights Data Survey, which was published a couple of months ago, reflected that 79.5% of camp residents had experienced police violence, regular aggressive behaviour, regular tear gassing. So, treating these people as criminals. There was every which way you turned, there was something incredibly overwhelming and heart-wrenching. And yet, small charities, not NGOs, Help Refugees has got 4
That's
people.
Important to mention.
Small charities were maintaining several thousand people. It's just nuts.
That's really important to mention, that it's not NGOs, it's small charities. Now,
They're grassroots charities.
Tell me this, when we don't represent the independent media, we don't. What this programme is, it's a standalone programme, and I'm not going to be bracketed or blanketed in with anybody else. But in some quarters of the independent media, they say, well, if you look at these refugees, you'll see a largely disproportionate amount of young men. And you hear a lot about this, ISIS and terrorists coming through with the tidal wave of refugees coming out of Syria and heading for Greece and southern Europe. So when you observed the masses of people, Remi, give us an idea of the gender balance that you observed, and give us an idea of the age groups. What sort of people were we talking about here? Young, older? Was it everybody?
Complete mix. There are 20 different nationalities in the refugee camp, for example. You know, Afghanistan, Sudan, Eritrea, Pakistan, Iraqi, Syrian, Iranian. So the complete mix in terms of cultural backgrounds. When I was there in November, and then I went back in December, and I've been back a few times since, I would say initially it was more male, but there was absolutely a presence of women and children, most definitely, and that continued to increase. I mean, if you look at the numbers now, even post the downsizing of the camp, so when I mean the downsizing, I mean, you know, the bulldozing and the reduction in size of the camp to now a third of its original size. There were probably 6,000 people then. There are still 4,900 people there now. You know, you've got 515 of those are kids, you know, and 70% of them are unaccompanied minors. So I think it's just, you know, mainstream conjecture that, you know,
Remi, can I ask you this?
These people without really doing the work. You know, there are surveys now being done by Help Refugees, by Citizens UK, to look at the very, you know, the mixed constitution of the camp and to understand it better. But, you know, I just think I think people like to wrap it up and misrepresent it because it's, you know, it's an easier story to tell. You know, if you look at the professions, Richie, interestingly, one of the recent surveys that was just done, they're lawyers, doctors, architects, military, low-skilled workers, you know, high-skilled workers, and these are proper surveys, and there's a census now that is conducted monthly. So I think, unfortunately, they're an easy target, this camp, you know, and we've got such sensitivity to issues like immigration that it's an easy button to press. To misrepresent. You know, I'm not saying that absolutely every single person in that camp is 100% honest. You know, there will be a representation in society like any society, but my experience is huge numbers of women and children in the camp, increasing, and generally, you know, decent people that I spoke to with a real mixture of professions and cultures.
Loads of tweets on it. You won't be surprised by that. So I'm going to read a few of them. Alex says, I think we have to take responsibility. We allowed those in power to do this. I think it's right we should be helping. But to clarify, I agree with you. Part of helping these people is waking up people here so we don't allow it to happen again, says Alex. I'm going to read through as many of these as I possibly can because there's loads of them coming in. Dee says, of course the refugees are being driven out of their countries by globalisation, but they are still human beings and need help, says Dee. Let me move down. Like I said, loads and loads and loads and loads of these coming in. I've had an email from Alan, and Alan says, quite right, we should help people as best we can, but we can't allow this go on year in, year out, decade in, decade out. At some point we have to address the point as to who causes this problem and who benefits from it, more importantly. And I've had a tweet from Wayne. Wayne says, with respect to you saying, Remi, that it hasn't gotten the sort of coverage that it maybe deserves on mainstream media. Wayne says they are not going to advertise their war crimes, are they? But here's an interesting one, and it comes in from Funk Soul on Twitter, who's attached, who's got an association with Alternate Current Radio. Can Remi please address the refugees? Now, Remi might not want to address this because she's not here to defend anybody, but Funk Soul says, can Remi address the refugees that continue to attack and rape many innocent men, women and children across Europe, and how this contributes to a lack of empathy amongst many Europeans right now? Funk Soul says this is hugely important to address. What I find interesting about that is we heard about this big New Year's attack in Germany, but as far as I know, not many people have been charged with anything there. A lot of people were investigated and were interrogated, but there weren't many charges. At least I don't think there were. What do you say to that, Remi? Do you say anything to it? Is that something you want to comment on?
I mean, look, you know, any form of violation or rape is absolutely abhorrent. You know, I'm not defending any refugee that commits a crime, but we have to look at the fact that, you know, this is a minority of people that have committed these acts, and yet, you know, they get so much media attention, and you know, there are plenty of violations and rapes that go on in all sorts of cultures, including our own. You know, just think about, you know, the domestic violence levels in our own Western cultures. So I don't feel best placed to point the finger at these refugees. I don't condone anything of that sort, but I think again, I just feel that they're an easy target. And I also feel that if people are truly concerned about, how aggressive behaviours pan out, then let's just think forward a few years. There are several hundred, 500 odd children currently, in the jungle that are unaccompanied. There are probably the recent estimate of 10,000 children that have gone missing in Europe, right? These children are not safe. They are remaining vulnerable to disease, to trafficking, to sexual exploitation and abuse.
These are under 16s, Remi. These are under 16s. 10,000 have gone missing in Europe. Yeah. That's a staggering number, isn't it?
It's totally staggering.
10,000.
And to tie it back to to Alan's point, we need to be thinking about what society we are creating, because the writing is on the wall on this one. I cannot condone those actions. What I will say that is in 10 to 15 years' time, when these highly traumatised, abused and isolated children reach adulthood, they will probably have endured such levels of hardship and desperation that all sorts of antisocial behaviour and destructive behaviour will be possible. And then we will say, firstly, how can we expect them to adhere to a moral code that we impose upon them? Of course we can't. And we're being short-sighted if we think we can. And then we will label them like we do now, and we will criminalise these people as social pests, as terrorists, as thieves, as muggers, as murderers, as rapists, and indeed whatever else we're currently paving the way for, Richie. It's a tough conversation to have, but actually we do need to be thinking about these frightening future outcomes, because to my mind, that this issue, these refugees that committed this heinous rape, these numbers and this social problem is going to explode as these children turn to adulthood, simply because we are not giving them the duty of care that they deserve. They're fleeing our bombs, they're desperate to find safety, and they want peace and protection on our shores. And therefore, if we're truly concerned about this issue, then let's just, pay it forward a few years and see what this looks like 10 to 15 years out.
No doubt. Look, there's a number of things we could get into, but we don't have all the time in the world. I mean, we could get into why so many don't seek asylum from the first country they go to. We'll get into that. I want to make it clear to Remi again. I spoke with Remi today. I'm no fan of politicians. I'm no fan of politics. I'm a champagne socialist. And I say that not with tongue in cheek. I am. I believe in a world where where people work together and couldn't care less about what colour they are, what religion they are, what football team they support. It doesn't matter. I'm an idealist. But I'll say this, I'm just saying this to our Twitter followers. I am not ignoring that Greece is on the verge of collapse. I'm not ignoring the worries that people have about services in this country being overwhelmed. I'm not ignoring that. We just don't have all night to chat, Remi and myself. But what I am going to bring up is something we spoke about today. Because Remi's an interesting lady. She's had her own awakening and her own, I suppose, not eureka moment, but I suppose kind of moment of clarity where you start to see things a bit differently and start to understand who's really running things and all of that. She's not, immune to the things we discuss on this programme. And I said it to her today. We believe, by we I mean myself, my producer and my social media team, that the refugee crisis is an intended consequence of the chaos that has been planned for Syria, for Libya, for Yemen and for other countries in the region. And I asked at the beginning of the programme about that conundrum. Can you put that to one side? Can you just for a minute, can you park it and think about helping women and children, particularly? I'm not being an idiot now. I know, men are no less important than women and children, but can you park it? Remi, we can't not deal with that. Our intelligence agencies created the terrorism in the Middle East. That's not a conspiracy theory. We know this to be true. Now, the French openly discussed this on their news talk programmes. Former foreign ministers say, as they knew in 2009, that movements are going to be made against the Bashar al-Assad government. This is what really drives people mad. And this is why some people say, I can't support taking in refugees at all, even though it kills me, because I see them as human beings, I see them in need. But it's because ultimately what the lunatics run in the system, it's what they want. Therefore I can't support it. Now, you must come up against this. How do you respond to that?
I mean, look, I get it, but my fundamental response is a humanitarian one. The reality is, any lunatic running any system, even if this is the fallout for them, we are a human race, and that's where I personally draw the line, and that's where the charity that I work with draws the line. We can all get caught up in the politics, and the politics are disgusting to many of us. But, fundamentally, you go and you see how these people are being made to live, many of them through no fault of their own, because, the outpouring of refugees is coming from countries that, frankly, we're involved in terms of that, the wars that are going on there. So, I almost feel like, I can get into the intellectual ego argument around, this or that government doing this or that thing, and all of this is true. But fundamentally, I have to respond from my heart, Richie. I have to respond from a human.
And listen,
I'm an idealist like you.
I endorse it, Remi. I endorse what you're doing. I really do. I endorse, any help that these misfortunate people can be given. Funk Soul came back on to say that he can park it. He does want to genuinely help the needy. The solution is not to fling the doors open for years. I'll tell you what I've come to believe, Remi. And I really do believe this. I've thought about this for a long time. The system, the agenda, wants to overwhelm countries with massive amounts of refugees. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they want to foster a culture of fear and hatred towards the refugees. Mm-hmm. This is an amazing contradiction. At the one time, they want to drive refugees into countries. On the same hand, they want to foster fear and hatred and loathing. And I'll tell you why I believe that is. And I mentioned this to you today. I believe it because people coming from parts of Africa, people coming from Zimbabwe, from South Africa, from Nigeria, from Somalia, from Sierra Leone, people coming from Libya, from Yemen, from Syria, they've been on the end of the gun of this cabal. So they know who's responsible. Syrian refugees know damn well that it hasn't been their government that has decided to just start murdering them willy-nilly. So the system can't have a world where refugees come into, they want refugees to come into the country, but refugees come in and we embrace them and we do the best by them, because that's dangerous for the system. Because to say what I said to you today, these people are carrying the truth and are carrying the news. Do you buy that, what I'm saying? On the one hand, they're driving them in. On the other hand, they want us to hate them and fear them. Yeah,
I do. I do. Yeah. I just look at how they're represented, know. Yeah. Just look at, some of the some of the media representation. It's amazing, that the media can talk about the refugee camp and liken it to, albeit that it's some ridiculous Daily Mail article, but nevertheless people read it, liken it to Glastonbury, as if it's looking at how these people are dishonest because they have mobile phones, as if they never had phones in their countries before they left them. Surely if you were about to have your house bombed to smithereens and your family blown to pieces, you would probably grab your passport and your mobile phone, would you not? So I completely believe what you're saying. Ultimately, that's, I personally feel the need to then find a way through that to, whilst holding those beliefs, do something about it, because I feel that, people power is an amazing thing. And, just looking at what's happened in the last 2 days, the Dubs Amendment has been passed, this amendment to allow 3,000 Syrian children, refugees, to be settled in the UK. It went to the House of Lords. It was actually proposed by Lord Dubs himself. It got approved in the Lords. It got kicked out at the Commons level. It went back to the Lords. Various charities, including Help Refugees, lots of people campaigning, saying, please lobby your MPs. And the government felt the pressure. And actually, they then reneged and said, OK, we will support Syrian refugee children coming into this country. So I feel that whilst we have to hold in our minds what's causing this, we also have to act. And I also believe, Richie, that by helping these people, by finding that heart connection, by helping these children, for example, people will start to really think, my goodness, I'm a parent. How would I feel if that was my child? And maybe when they're maybe when they're interacting with the situation at that level, and not just in the mind, not just the intellect, but also the heart, then maybe they might start to question what's causing this, what's pushing this forward, and interact with that information in a slightly different way. So I think it has to be a two-tiered approach.
I hope so, Remi. I hope they do. I mean, the mainstream media controls the narrative. I mentioned in the monologue earlier that, this change to the structure of the BBC is very negative. It's basically giving the government more power over the BBC and the BBC's output. Now, look, I sarcastically said earlier on, the BBC is so far up the establishment's backside anyway, what difference does it make? But, will people start to ask the questions as to why this is happening? I don't know. I think it's going to be left to the independent media always to get better at what it is we do to reach more people, because they're not going to get it in the media. Martin Houston, who's an activist and a socialist, says he still would like to know why so many of the refugees that he sees on European media particularly, why they seem to be so many young men, strong men in their 20s. It's not typical, he says, of a fleeing population. It stinks. He says that's his opinion. Can I be your light, says, we look after humanity first and everything else will fall into place. The majority of people are saying, yes, we know why this is happening, but we should help the refugees. I'm going to bring something else up, Remi, and I mentioned this to you today, and that is, we're going to be speaking with John Hemming, the former Liberal Democrat MP, in the second hour. And a bit of an issue for this programme is the issue of forced adoption. Now, I'm well aware that the issue of forced adoption isn't something that you've been too briefed on, and that's fair enough. Most people in Britain don't understand the scale of how social services and child protective services take children out of homes, many times for no good reason, and put them into foster care or adoption. I said to you today, it's £1 billion industry. I'm worried, Remi, because you said 10,000 kids have gone missing in Europe. This is borne out to be true. Your facts are absolutely right. It's terrifying. Thousands of children go missing out of foster care in Britain every year. It's a multi-billion pound industry, and I wonder how much of this, let's bring in the Syrian children, whom I agree with you we should help, how much of this has been motivated by the financial aspect of that? Because a lot of adoption agencies and a lot of foster parents are going to do really well out of those Syrian children coming in. I hate to say it, Remi, but that's what we're here to do. You won't hear this on the BBC. Now, I know you're not as well briefed as... I knew nothing about forced adoption till last year. Nothing about it. I had no idea what was going on. But this is true. It's not 10,000 kids, but I think somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 young teens go missing, basically, from the foster care system in this country every year. Would you not worry about those Syrian kids and what's going to happen to them in this country? Big question, eh?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you present it to me like that, of course I would worry. The reality is, though, their circumstances are far worse in that I think it's absolutely, objectionable that the foster care system has these flaws in it, considering it's supposed to be protecting our most vulnerable members of our society. It's yet another system that doesn't work brilliantly. I hate to say it, but, quelle surprise. These children, however, have absolutely no hope right now. They're roaming around unaccompanied. They're open to all sorts of abuses with no protection. If they came into the foster care system, and that would be a reality for some of these refugee children, because if we're going to resettle 3,000 kids, we need somewhere for them to live. If they came into the foster care system, yes, they would probably be exposed to some of the flaws in that system. But I take my chances, Richie, that some of those children will be rehoused and have a far better chance of scraping back some semblance of a normal life for themselves, going, if that's what they choose, but, being in a warm family home, choosing an education if that's what they want, etc., etc. I mean, that is just not an option for these kids. So I'm kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I think it's terrible that we have a system that fails our children, or maybe that the children don't want to be in and want to escape from. Equally, we create the outpouring of these refugees. I just feel a strong sense of responsibility that we have to help them, and this is one of the means of helping them.
Remi, I want to thank you for coming on. It's brilliant. It's a serious discussion. It's very important. I've already retweeted the details for Help for Refugees, and I've tweeted out your Twitter details. But give us the name of the Facebook page again, and we'll tweet that out as well.
So my Facebook page is called the London Familia, spelt Familia, Refugee Support Group, and it's actually a non-public page, but just, if you want to click on, just click on and I'll approve you. And Help Refugees has obviously got a Facebook page. Another one that I really would love to mention is the Worldwide Tribe. And they have a fantastic narrative telling the amazing stories of some of these refugees, the fortitude, the resilience, the bravery, the courage, and all of that great stuff that is really quite inspirational. So they're called the Worldwide Tribe. That's worth checking out too. And just to respond to Martin, who came in about the women and children, Richie, there are 57,000 refugees in mainland Greece currently. 65% of them are women and children. How the media represent them in terms of, pictures, well, look, we all know that that's never going to be as balanced as we'd like, and frankly, there's a lot of ways and means of hiding the reality. But the numbers speak the truth. 65% of 57,000 women and children. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
So, just to go back to Martin and his point, and if anyone wants to contact me directly, you've got my Twitter @Remsterrant and my email. So
that's right, @Remsterrant. Remi, look, thanks for doing that. I've no doubt we'll speak again. I appreciate what it is you're doing. I think it's noble and I think it's right. I really do. And these are difficult things to discuss, especially for those who, like myself, feel very, very passionate about what's really behind what's happening. But no matter who's behind it, no matter what's happening, it doesn't change the fact that massive amounts of people who've never done any harm to anybody are in situations that we couldn't imagine and we certainly wouldn't tolerate. Thanks for coming on, and you're welcome back to come back anytime you want. Thanks, Remi.
Thank you so much, Richie. Thanks ever so much. Bye now.
Marvellous. Bye now. That's terrific stuff. That's Remi Olajoyegbe on the line to us there from London.